Coco Gauff's ex-coach Brad Gilbert refuses to work with Emma Raducanu subtly after Brit's 10th coach change. In the latest episode of the Big T podcast, Coco Gauff's former coach, Brad Gilbert, former WTA pro Coco Vandeweghe, and former Australian Open finalist Danielle Collins discussed various burning topics from the recently concluded Grand Slam in Melbourne and everything that happened on the sidelines. In one segment, the trio discussed former US Open champion Emma Raducanu parting ways with her coach, Francisco Roig, after a disappointing second-round exit at the Australian Open. Speaking on the topic, Gilbert took a sly dig at the 23-year-old Brit, pointing out the high frequency with which she has changed coaches in recent years. "Well, I'm surprised it lasted this long. She made it 6 months, right? Isn't that a long way for her?" Gilbert said. Sometime after, Vandeweghe pointed out that Raducanu needed a coach, and Gilbert wasn't interested in taking the job should the opportunity arise. "I want to coach again, but I will make my decision," replied Gilbert to Vandeweghe's statement. The British number one had teamed up with Roig, Rafael Nadal's former coach, in the summer of 2025, but just 6 months later parted ways with him, citing re-evaluating her coaching needs. She had a disappointing stint during the Australian swing, losing her only match in the United Cup, making a quarter-final exit at the Hobart International, and then being knocked out by Anastasia Potapova in the second round of the Australian Open. Emma Raducanu has had 9 different coaches in her young professional career. Raducanu turned pro in 2018 and won her first major Grand Slam in 2021 at Flushing Meadows in New York. Since turning pro, the Brit number one has had inconsistent runs on the WTA circuit, marred by multiple injury stints and frequent coaching changes. She has had a total of 9 coaches since turning pro. She is currently under the guidance of former player Alexis Cantor, who has accompanied the Brit to Cluj-Napoca, Romania, where she is playing the Winners' Open, a WTA 250 event. In Romania, Raducanu has cruised through the opening 2 rounds and will now be facing Maja Kwalinska in the quarterfinals on Thursday. Her best stint with a coach came under Nigel Sears, who guided the then-teenager to her maiden 4th-round appearance at Wimbledon, and Andrew Richardson, who then led her to her maiden Grand Slam title at the US Open in 2021. It remains to be seen whether her trial stint with the 10th coach of her pro career can last longer than the previous ones. Also read: Taylor Fritz's girlfriend Morgan Riddle traumatized by brutal conditions while returning to LA from Australian Open. Where is Venus Williams playing next? All about Americans' upcoming schedule after failed Australian Open attempt. Ben Shelton's girlfriend Trinity Rodman's mother Michelle gets emotional bringing back old memories with American. College Sports Network has you covered with the latest news, analysis, insights, and trending stories in tennis, college football, men's college basketball, women's college basketball, and college baseball. When experience meets hesitation, Brad Gilbert and the Raducanu coaching crossroads. On a chilly February morning in 2026, as the tennis world buzzed with the echoes of the Australian Open and the slow hum of the early tour season, a curious line of commentary rippled through the sports community. It didn't come from a player. It didn't come from a tournament director. Rather, it emerged in the measured, occasionally sardonic voice of Brad Gilbert, the veteran coach known for his sharp tactical mind and candid observations. On a recent episode of the Big T podcast, Gilbert found himself quizzed about a question that has become almost proverbial in the W. Would he consider coaching Emma Raducanu? His response, more subtle than abrupt but no less definitive, hinted at a reluctance that speaks volumes about perception, stability, and the modern athlete-coach relationship. The subtle swipe, what Brad Gilbert really said. Gilbert's response was not a dramatic public rejection. There was no headline-grabbing no or outright dismissal. Instead, the former coach of Coco Gauff, himself a student of tennis veterans and a shrewd analyst, chose nuance. In the segment, when the conversation turned to Raducanu's recent split from Francisco Roig, her latest coach in a long line of team changes, Gilbert quipped about the sheer frequency of Raducanu's coaching carousel. "I'm surprised it lasted this long," he said, referring to her 6-month stint with Roig. Then, when asked whether he might step in, he offered a diplomatic but telling reply: "I want to coach again, but I will make my decision." It was a phrase that sounded positive on the surface, yet in context suggested an absence of urgency or inclination toward this particular opportunity. The subtlety here is important. In tennis, as in other sports, the coach's choice often tells a story far more eloquently than a flat rejection. Gilbert's words likely reflect a combination of respect for Raducanu's talent and a hesitancy rooted in her recent history, one marked by rapid transitions, experimental attitudes toward coaching, and more questions than answers about long-term direction. The Raducanu coaching odyssey. To understand the implications of Gilbert's stance, one must first map Raducanu's coaching evolution. After her stunning breakthrough victory at the 2021 US Open, a storybook moment that captivated global audiences, the British #1 seemed poised for a bright, consistent ascent. Instead, that victory began a journey filled with coaching changes, injuries, and a search for a formula that would unlock her full potential. Since turning professional in 2018, Raducanu has cycled through 9 different coaches, with her latest split coming with Roig in late January 2026 following a disappointing second-round defeat at the Australian Open. Her next coach, the 10th, was poised to be yet another chapter in a relationship with the sport's supporting cast that rarely exceeded half a season. That constant turnover has created both sympathy and skepticism in the industry. On one hand, Raducanu's talent is undeniable. Her technique, power, and instinctive flair were all on display during her US Open run. On the other hand, her reluctance or inability to maintain long-term coaching partnerships has raised concerns about consistency and strategic development. Why coaches hesitate? The challenge of stability. When a player changes coaches as frequently as Raducanu, the challenges extend beyond simple logistics. A coach must not only teach, they must guide, shape, and strategize over time. Tennis is an individual sport with a complex emotional landscape, and building trust is not instantaneous. For many coaches, stability is not just a preference, it's a prerequisite for meaningful progress. A coach like Brad Gilbert, known for methodical preparation and deep intellectual engagement with his players, might look at Raducanu's record and wonder whether the circumstances allow for the kind of sustained collaboration that yields true transformation. Consider this. Top champions almost invariably benefit from long,